Well, welcome once again, and thanks for attending this on a fantastic Friday morning. My name is Darren Clabo. I am the South Dakota State Fire Meteorologist and a research scientist at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. And this presentation is just going to cover the 2021, really the summer South Dakota wildland fire potential outlook. What are we seeing for the summer months? And So the goals for this presentation, I'll look at a wildfire climatology of South Dakota just because it's really important to understand when, where, and why fires occur across the state. Then we'll look at current climate conditions, some forecast conditions out a few months, and then we'll end with the wildfire potential in South Dakota. Just a brief overview of last year. This was my ending slide from last year's outlook. I was thinking of an average to below average large fire potential across the state. 2019 was an incredibly wet year statewide. We had abundant soil moisture, we had abundant fine fuel growth, and then coming into the spring months, about this time last year, we were doing well on green up. We did get a little bit of spring moisture that was pretty good, and the forecast projections for the summer months were kind of on the fence. There wasn't a lot of confidence in either warmer than average or colder than average temperatures, or not a lot of confidence in above average or below average precipitation. And so I kind of carried this idea of average fire potential throughout the summer months, or even below average fire potential through the summer months, because we had such a high amount of moisture in the bank, if you will, the soil moisture bank. But as you all know, we did dry out last year, and we dried out considerably. We didn't have any drought conditions across the state, but again, drought spread across the state last summer due to some above average temperatures, some windier conditions, and the lack of precipitation. So we kind of ended up the summer, I would say average to above average potential. We were getting into July and August. We were definitely seeing some elevated wildfire potential. But I think we did get some very fortunate rain events that came in a timely fashion, and the fires that we did get, there was just some really good firefighting to keep those relatively small. So looking at a wildfire climatology of the state. Now, this is a very busy slide, but it's kind of laid out in the shape of South Dakota, if you will. The top left graph represents wildfire activity in the northwest part of the state. The bottom left of the graph is southwest. The far middle left graph is the Black Hills. The far bottom right is the southeast. So it's kind of just laid out kind of a grid, across the state. And this just looks at temporally when we actually see wildfire activity. For much of western South Dakota, northwestern, the Black Hills, and southwestern South Dakota, the peak fire activity really occurs from late June through really Labor Day weekend. That's when our peak fire activity occurs. Across central South Dakota, these middle three slides, we're seeing, north central and south central South Dakota are relatively similar to western South Dakota, and we see a peak in the summer months. But we do start to see kind of a sub peak in the fall months, especially across central South Dakota. Really, the most acreage that we burn up is in September and October, although the most number of fires we get is really during the peak summer months. And again, I should have mentioned this before, these graphs on the bottom is month January through December. And on the left-hand side is the total area burned, and that's in hectares, roughly 2.5 acres to 1 hectare. And on the number of right is the number of fires. And so a line represents the number of fires. So read that off the right-hand side. And the graphs, the bars, represent the area burned. So read that off the left-hand side of the graph. And I do separate it out from lightning to just total fires. So, it's interesting if we look at the Central South Dakota Climate Division, yeah, we get the most number of fires in July and August, but we get the most acreage burn in September and October. And I think that's really just due to the fact that, during the summer months, we get enough precipitation where grass is growing, but it's green. And then once we reach the fall months, when the grass starts to desiccate is when we get the fire activity. The eastern side of the state, we've really already gotten past the peak fire activity. It's really this time of the year, March, April, and early May. And I do know that eastern side of the state in early April did get a lot of fire activity. And so, their peak that they see was definitely shown this year. Fortunately, in the middle of April, we did get some really good precipitation events that really mitigated the overall fire potential for those areas. And now I think they're greening up. And with these warmer temperatures that we're going to be seeing over the coming weeks, I think that green up will be good to go out there. And so The focus now for this presentation is really going to be central and western South Dakota, because those are the areas that we see kind of peak fire activity during the months of June, July, and August, and even into September. So that's going to be my focus. Eastern South Dakota, sorry, I'm not leaving you out of this thing, but we're kind of already past the peak over there. So this is just looking at the Black Hills, but it really is representative of what we're seeing over the western half or the western third of the state. What drives big fires in the months of June, July, and August? Well, in June and July, drought. Drought is a big factor that drives wildfire activity, because these are months that are typically wet and we typically have pretty green fuels. But if we have drought, then we're predisposing those areas to having that dryness and to allow those fuels to burn. And both in June and July, we're looking at above average temperatures for big fires to occur. And then, of course, short-term precipitation deficits, along with those long-term precipitation deficits that would kind of lead into drought conditions. Going more into August, it's really related to temperature and short-term precipitation deficits. It's not as much drought in August. And that's really, it just goes into kind of scorching the fuels, if you will, in July and August. And this is really what happened back in 2012. 2012, the spring months weren't too bad in terms of precipitation, but it was so dang hot in July and August. And we did have a lack of precipitation in July and August, where we were able to burn in late August and into September. And so, as we get towards August and September, we start waning off our high precipitation months, and it's really more related to heat and short-term precipitation deficits. So looking at kind of a longer term thing, what's the percent of normal precipitation? And this is a misnomer. This is year to date, not the past 12 months. And we're really looking at very dry conditions across the northern Great Plains. Exceptionally dry conditions over the past 4 months. And really, March and April are starting to get into our wettest months of the year. April and May are the wettest months of the year. So we should be starting to see some good precipitation, and we just haven't seen it across those areas. Going down in Nebraska, northeastern Colorado, it's been wet, and it looks like it's going to continue to be wet. There's a few good precipitation systems coming through those areas. In the southern hills, the central and southern hills have actually seen a lot of moisture as well, which is kind of unique for the central and southern hills to be the benefactor when it comes to those big snowfall events. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, you can definitely see, South Dakota is in the middle of the screen right here. We can definitely see that above average precipitation that's been falling across the central and southern Black Hills, going into, kind of the Edgemont Dewey country as well down in Fall River County. And really just a benefactor of precipitation. And that precipitation has extended across kind of the southern tier counties of South Dakota. And again, eastern South Dakota has seen some pretty incredibly wet conditions. And then looking up into northwestern and north central South Dakota, where we're actually seeing red flag warnings today. By the way, today is April 30th. Those are the areas that have been missing out on all the moisture. For the same time frame, year to date, departure from normal temperature, kind of northeastern South Dakota, north central South Dakota has been much above average. The western third of the state, southwestern South Dakota, has been largely below average. And a lot of these cooler temperatures, because of those precipitation events that we've been seeing across those areas, if we get a lot of precipitation, it tends to keep things a little bit cooler. And this is just interesting. I'm going to relate these next graphs back to this percent of normal precipitation. I'm going to look at Buffalo, South Dakota, and then I'm going to look at Rapid City, and then I'm going to look at Custer. And my dots are a little bit off, forgive me. But I just want to kind of illustrate what we've been looking at in terms of total accumulated precipitation. In Buffalo, and this is total accumulated precipitation since October 1st. So October 1st is over here, present time is over here. We have precipitation inches on the left-hand side, and then of course time on the bottom. The maroon line is average precipitation, while the green kind of filled out line is the precipitation we've actually seen since October 1st. And in Buffalo, you really haven't gotten any precip up in that area since the end of October. It's been so incredibly dry. But we can transition that, and now we're in massive precipitation deficits. We're 2 to 3 inches over the past 6 months. That's not a good winter, right? And we can transition that to Rapid City. Rapid City's also been pretty dry since the start of the water year, or October 1st of last year. We're running an inch or 2 inches below average in terms of accumulated precipitation since October 1st. But if we drop down into Custer, the southern hills, Custer was relatively dry coming out of 2020 and even entering into 2021. But once, the end of January hit, man, it's been a free for all for precipitation down there. Some good snow events, 1 to 2 feet, some good rain events over the past few days, just a lot of precipitation. And so, Custer's kind of digging themselves out of a hole with the precipitation that we've been getting recently. Looking at our soil moisture, of course, because we have had a really dry 2020 and a relatively dry start to 2021 for many areas, our soil moistures are very dry. So we just don't have a lot of moisture in the bank out there. And this is probably going to stress a lot of agricultural concerns across the state, going from ranching all the way into farming, to row crops, to dryland farming, everything. There's just not a lot of moisture out there. And this leads directly into the U.S. Drought Monitor, where we haven't been seeing that precipitation, is definitely where we're seeing more expansive drought. If we look at this time last year, we were just starting to get some abnormally dry conditions entering into the state. But again, 2020 became really, really dry, and now we have abnormally dry conditions all the way up to extreme drought across most of South Dakota. Far east central South Dakota kind of got themselves out of the drought conditions with these recent precipitation events. But if we look closely at the western side of the state, western third of the state, again, we're not seeing as much drought conditions in the southern hills due to that recent precipitation, but the northwestern corner of the state's been exceptionally dry. And we can also look at a product called VegDry, or the Vegetation Drought Response Index. And this kind of looks at how vegetation is responding to drought. And basically, it's showing a lot of similarity to what we saw in the U.S. Drought Monitor. There's dry conditions across the state. The vegetation that's out there, obviously, coming out of the winter months is dead, and it's due to the lack of precipitation across really the northwestern quarter of the state. It's not greening up as usual. And so we're definitely seeing kind of those brown conditions on the landscape when they should be a little bit more green this time of the year. So what is it looking like for the next few months? And again, this is the worst day to do an outlook. I didn't think about this when I planned it, but these new outlooks are produced on the beginning of the month. And so this is kind of an old outlook. It's made on the 15th of April. New outlooks will be coming the start of the month here in May over the next couple of days, but I don't think they're going to change that much. We have temperature on the left-hand side over here and precipitation on the right-hand side. And temperatures for the May, June, July timeframe are looking well above average for nearly all of the United States. The primary focus of the heat is going to be across the Four Corners area, Desert Southwest, Great Basin, but that heat does extend up into the northern Great Plains. We're also looking at getting a lack of precipitation during this time. There's high confidence in below average precipitation across a wide swath of the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Rockies, and of course the Northern Great Plains. And so the combination of the heat and the combination of the dry conditions during these 3 normally wet months, I think, are really going to set the stage for an active fire season across South Dakota. And that's why the Climate Prediction Center has really said that, hey, if we're looking at our drought outlook, we're going to see that drought persist across the area. We're looking at above average temperatures, below average precipitation during this period. And so we're likely going to see the drought persist or intensify or develop in areas that we're not already seeing those drought conditions. And so, kind of some critical things to think about as we go into our fire season is not only South Dakota, but look at the rest of the Western United States. Primed fire season, this map is valid through the end of July. And a lot of this is prime fire season for the area. And if we're looking at expanding drought, I think we're going to start to stress a lot of our wildfire fighting resources nationwide. Going out a little bit farther, July, August, and September, much of the same. We're looking at a high confidence of above average temperatures across the entire United States and a high confidence of below average precipitation, especially across the northern Great Plains, the upper Midwest, extending up into the northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. So dry conditions, hot conditions are likely to continue through the end of the summer months. With that in mind, I do expect above average potential for large fires across the state in the June through August timeframe. And this is the timeframe that this outlook's really geared in on. There's strong signals for below average precipitation from now all the way through the end of summer. We already have widespread drought conditions. 2020 depleted the soil moisture that we gained in 2019. And remember that drought is an important factor for large June and July wildfires. And then going into August, it's short-term precipitation deficits and hot temperatures. All of these things are in the forecast. And I do have to stress that it is a forecast, but these signals are exceptionally strong for these conditions. It just kind of everything we're looking at is really pointing to a hot and dry summer for our region. And another big thing that I like to look at when it comes to forecasting fires on a more weekly basis in the summertime is if we get 10 or more days of above average temperatures that are in a row, then we really start to tilt the scales towards the potential for big fires. So if we get towards the months of July, early August, and we're running, a week or 2 weeks of well above or near record high temperatures, we're really going to have to start considering the possibility of a lot of big fires developing. But remember that climate drivers change throughout the whole entire year, and I will be producing monthly outlooks at the start of every month to reflect any changes to this outlook itself. I know that tomorrow is going to be May 1st. Happy May Day to everybody, but I'll be producing my May outlook on Monday, May 3rd. Looking at kind of NIFC's idea of what they're thinking for big fires across the areas going into June and July. June's on your left, July's on the right. June, high potential for big fires across the desert Southwest going into the Four Corners region, some central areas of Washington and Oregon. And then going into July, it's really looking like the Great Basin is going to start to light up, southwestern Wyoming, the west slopes of Colorado, and of course, California running all the way up into Oregon and Washington. California's in a real dire situation this year. They really didn't get a winter precipitation season, which is when they usually get all their precipitation. So they're coming into the summer months exceptionally dry. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if 2021 is another exceptional fire year by really all metrics. So here's my contact information. I encourage you to reach out if you got information about fuels or fire conditions in your area of the state. That's my phone number, my email address. I do have a blog that I run and I keep it updated really only the times when I'm seeing critical fire conditions. I'll put a post on there and then I'll tweet a link to the post. And my Twitter handle is @SDFireWeather. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have any. I am going to stop this recording. And so if you do want to use this recording for any of your refresher trainings or hand it out, please do so. I'll send out the link as soon as possible. So as soon as I stop this recording, feel free to ask any questions.